Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and it is my privilege to host this show where I get to talk to folks from all over the world who are education thought leaders and innovators. We'll hear inspiring stories from educators, EdTech founders, AI experts, and others who are fearlessly innovating and delivering unique learning experiences. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Warning, the following discussion may make you angry. Are AI companies guilty of copyright violations on a massive scale? Numerous lawsuits have been filed, including the New York Times suing OpenAI, claiming that copyright protected content has been used to train AI without permission or compensation. There's a growing community of content creators who are protesting the way these companies are profiting from systems that could not exist without the copyright protected content they've trained them on. So without getting too technical here, I do think it's important that we understand a little bit about how this training is actually done and how they use the data. So there's a thing called transformer-based architecture. Now you'll see comments that, oh, these AI systems are just, doing pattern matching, but it really goes much deeper than that. There's a neural network literally designed to work the way our brains work. And it uses a system of encoding to assign values and to the relationships between words. So basically, it analyzes massive amounts of data and it learns which words are likely to go together, but it also learns what a word may mean in a particular context, or what it might mean depending on the context and the position within a sentence. Okay, so this is complicated. It's not just pattern matching. And within these patterns, right? So they do see patterns, right? Patterns are combinations of multiple words, and they can process billions now, billions of parameters. So part of that is this concept called attention or self-attention. And it's a complex bit of math that's done, and each of these developers have to develop their own algorithms for this, but it's used to figure out which words or combination of words in a sentence to focus on. So proprietary rules and algorithms and stuff that they've developed in order to train on all of this data, but the data comes from us. So in some cases, the companies are also using something called reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. So this basically means that as they're going through this training, they also have people sitting there looking at the output from the AI and giving it feedback, right? So when it gets it wrong, they tell it you got it wrong. Now, this is also a bit controversial because some of these developers, not all of them, some of them have used low-paid workers, places like the Philippines, to do a lot of this work. So again, they're making a lot of money, but they're not paying a lot for the services of these folks who are contributing to the development of the system. But let's not get distracted on that issue. Let's stay focused on the copyright violation concern. So how do the companies defend this, right? So the common defense is something called fair use. So I did some looking up, some study on this, research around what is fair use, and they refer to it as transformative purposes. Okay, so they don't use the original data; they transform it into something else. So Stanford has an article on this that I linked in the reference section of the show notes. You can read that. You probably should read that. You need to understand this stuff. So they put fair use into two categories. The first category is called commentary and criticism. The second one is parody. So for example, I have another podcast. You may not realize that, but I have a podcast called No Harm in Asking. And it's a classic case there of fair use because and of the commentary and criticism variety. So we review other podcasts and often include examples from those podcasts, to help illustrate the points we're trying to make. That's fair use. It's also fair use. So like when I write book reviews, which I do now and then because I like to read and I share what I learn. So, but a book review can contain quotes from the book. That's also considered fair use. I don't do a lot of parody, but the best example of that, the obvious example of that, right, are the late night comedians, right? So they'll make fun of a person and their work, even if that work is copyright protected, intellectual property, and that parody is still fair use. Okay, it's legal. So, but I am struggling to see how, what the AI companies are doing with all of this copyright protected content out there and how that could fall under this defense of fair use. That said, I also going to look at it this way and I think, well, don't we all use content? We consume copyright protected content all the time, right? I mean, some of the articles I linked in here, right? I consumed them. I read them, or listened to, whatever, watched stuff. And then I produce content like this, right? That's influenced by the stuff I read. So is AI, they just doing that, but on a massive scale? All right, before you jump all over me, I'm not trying to defend these AI platform developers. I'm just raising the point that, they may have valid legal defense, right? And none of the lawsuits have been settled yet. So there's also a new development on the legal side. You may have heard just recently the U.S. Supreme Court struck down something called the Chevron Doctrine. And unfortunately, what that's going to do is it's going to make it even harder to regulate AI and other advanced technologies. I don't want to get too deep into the technical, legal, issues there, but suffice it to say, they've made it. The ruling from the Supreme Court is going to make it easier for the AI developers to appeal and appeal and appeal, and the agencies that understand the technology will no longer be able to influence the courts. So this is going to kind of potentially cause all kinds of inconsistencies as different courts and different jurisdictions rule differently, because they don't really have the technical expertise to understand the implications of the decisions. So, all right. I totally get emotional reaction here. These companies are making billions of dollars, and and they're using technology developed using all of our content, right, without asking or compensating us. So the problem is, we don't know what the courts are going to do with those lawsuits, and there's a bunch of them now. But it's entirely possible that nothing's going to happen there, right? We can complain all we want and pitch a fit because they're potentially copyright violations, but these courts are these cases are going to be hung up in the courts for years, right? Between the appeals process, and some of them may now just get dismissed because the companies have these very technical arguments and trying to explain transformer-based architecture and encoding and decoding and all this stuff in the courts, and the courts may just go, what, we can't decipher this. We don't know. And so we're not qualified. We're not going to argue, and we're going to dismiss the cases. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying it seems like a possibility here. And it's very frustrating. I get it. At the same time, what we can do, right? Let's focus on what we can do, not on what we can't do, because we can't control the courts and the legal system. But we can try to protect our own intellectual property, right? Our IP. So, and if you don't want it to be used to train, AI. So some of the platforms out there are starting to provide mechanisms by which we can opt out, right? You see this in some of the systems. We're prompting and you're uploading documents or whatever, and you can opt out and say you cannot use my stuff for training. That's good. That helps. It's a step in the right direction. But there's proposals for systems to allow all the creators to opt out. But the one thing that frustrates me is that this puts the onus on us, right? The content creators have the burden of effort here because we've got to go opt out, right? What we need and what lots of people are now calling for is the reverse, where the developers have to get you to opt in and then compensate you for it, right? So maybe we'll get there eventually. This is part of what I think we were hoping the lawsuits might push as a resolution, but who knows when that's going to happen? It's probably only going to happen out of the willingness, not any obligation of the developers to do it. Okay, I've gone a bit long here, but I really think that this is it's a very, very important topic for anyone who's using AI, right? So including schools, you need to understand this stuff. It's really part of being AI literate, I think. So businesses and schools, you need to monitor these legal cases and see what comes out of them. But you also need to be sensitive to how you're using AI, right? And that there's an angry mob out there. There's some people who are really wrapped around the axle on this, and you're going to get pushback. You're using AI, or you're developing your own AI systems, right? There's going to be pushback, so you need to be sensitive to this issue. How do you protect yourself from pushback or outlash from folks who are unhappy about the whole scenario here? Now, I'm not saying you should stop using AI until the legal issues are resolved. I'm just saying, be sensitive to the concerns, protect your own content where you can, and when you use AI, really scrutinize what it's giving you back, right? Use it ethically and transparently, right? You should be clear that you're using AI when you do and when it's in product that you produce. All right. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators Podcast. Please subscribe and share and like or comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this controversial topic. Please, no angry hate mail. But to all those innovators out there, thanks for doing what you do. You are making a difference.